Welcome back, friends and fellow makers. I've got a simple project that ties into some of the other concepts that were included in instructional videos that I previously posted, like the tooth cutting demo, which helped us learn a little bit about how to make proper choices of tools based on the materials that we're working with for cutting those materials. The measuring and marking lecture series, which familiarized us with some of the measuring and marking tools that are most commonly used for different practices of making. And the drill and drive lecture series, which introduced a number of the tools that we're going to be working with today and seeing how they can be applied to what we're doing here. So our project is building what's commonly referred to as a box beam. So box beams are typically used for either structural applications or for decorative applications. So a structural application of a box beam would be something that would be engineered for carrying a heavy load. So it could be a compressive vertical load, or it could be a lateral load, to distribute that load over more surface area. But box beams are often fabricated as well for aesthetic treatments, where someone wants to do something like what's called a coffered ceiling, where the ceiling is segmented into these beams that are made out of lumber and put together in such a way that they have the appearance of being a singular element. What we're going to be focusing on today are box beams for carrying substantial loads. And so we're going to be looking at the function of this, which is what I need from it. And I need this to be able to resist impact, to absorb compressive forces. And I also need this to be weather resistant, because it's going to be located outdoors where it's going to be exposed to the elements. So those functional aspects of the project help me make my material choices. And but again, we might also be making these choices of materials based on the appearances, the aesthetics of that material. And in this case, the aesthetics are nothing more than to say to anyone that looks at this that I got this, no problem. Don't bang into me because I'll push back. So what is this thing that I'm building? Well, it's a structure that's going around a drainage pipe. So the cost of replacement of this drainage pipe, if it was to get, which is located in the alley off the back of my garage, the cost of replacing this drainage pipe would be both the time and labor and the materials involved in doing it. And there's a high probability that if someone damaged this drainage pipe or tried to take it off of the building to recycle it as scrap, that they would cause damage to the rest of the system, which is a gutter system that this is attached to. So I have a 6-inch diameter corrugated piece of galvanized steel tubing, which that was my starting point. I measured that, and then I went to making some calculations to see if I could contain that or build a structure around that that would keep it from being crushed or keep it from being removed with a lumber that met the kind of physical requirements that I talked about before, in terms of impact resistance and weather resistance, and that also had an imposing look to it. So what it was also in my interest, because I was working with this material that is treated for outdoor use. I was doing anything I could to minimize the number of cuts that I was making in that material, to in turn minimize the amount of dust that I was generating, because even though this treated lumber that I have is a more environmentally sustainable and less toxic material than things like womanized or conventional pressure-treated lumber, which is super, super nasty. This particular product has a tag on it that tells us a little bit about what chemicals were involved in treating this to give it its rot resistance and its insect infestation resistance and its ability to resist things like mold growing on it. And it also has this, what's called an SC certification on it that means that it is supposed to be something that is more environmentally sensitive, sustainable, or in general less toxic to work with. But I can tell you that that anytime I work with any treated lumber at all, I'm always going to make sure that I'm either wearing a barrier glove on my hands, or failing that, ensuring that I'm washing my hands very well before I come in contact with, my eyes or my mouth, or before I ate food or did anything like that. I'd want to thoroughly wash my hands, because there is residue that will transfer from this material. And it's not at all unusual that when you buy this material that it feels cool and damp, because in the process of this material, they saturate it with this chemistry. And the way that they saturate it is by pushing it in with liquid. And so this material it feels damp or wet to the touch. And you're picking that up. And you'll find that if you have it in an enclosed space like this, and you have, kind of awareness of what to be smelling for, you will smell that it has an odor. And anytime something has an odor, it's affecting you in some way, whether that be baked cookies or, something else. So we want to be very mindful about making sure that we're exercising proper personal injury protection when we're working with things like pressure-treated lumber. I had to make some cross cuts to reduce the length of these pieces of material, and I did that outside because I don't want that dust in my everyday workspace. So to minimize that respiratory risk myself, I worked outside. And one of the things that makes working outside really easy is to have some good quality sawhorses that you can use. And even in the studio, I often use sawhorses as work surfaces because they're very versatile. And when we move in for a closer look, we'll kind of look at these particular sawhorses, and I'll talk about why I have found these to be sort of my go-to sawhorses when it comes to working in the studio. So among the things that we have laid out on here are our drill/driver, a series of bits that we're going to need to use to create pilot holes to accommodate our hardware. I also have my hardware on hand. I have a tape measure, which I could do all of my work with, but I like that combination of the tape measure and a speed square for doing my layout on the material here. You'll also see that I have things clamped up because trying to get pieces to stay in place when you're drilling and driving them is often a challenge. The fit up is not going to be perfect every time, so clamps allow you to sort of pull things down into position and have them held securely while you're doing things like drilling and driving, with your hands free to be focusing on the tool instead of holding the work and the tool at the same time. So we'll talk a little bit about clamps and the advantages of some clamps over others. And we're also going to talk about dust collection and some of the options that might be available for us when it comes to inexpensive ways to remove particulate in the area that we're working to minimize its distribution throughout our workspace. So, sawdust is a serious respiratory irritant. It can lead to chronic health disorders, and so take it very seriously, especially when we're working with material like this treated lumber that has chemicals involved in it. So let's move in for a little bit of a closer look at what we've got going on the table here.